I'll see if I could maybe touch on both. In terms of religion's role, I think some of what Lema shared, some of the comments I've heard from victims who are involved in faith communities, they have in instances shared that they didn't feel like they got quite the response they wanted when they went to their faith, their church for help or guidance. And I think that, that could really be like a heavy conversation. I think what we see in the community is maybe not so much of the strong involvement of faith communities. Sometimes they seem to kind of stick to the communities they're in, and I think what the community would like to see more of is a coming together of the faith organizations to address some of these issues and to actually speak out against them, because even in reading scripture, you have to read all of the passages and maybe not just one passage, the passages that come before and after the particular selected passage, but and to find where scripture doesn't speak about hurting so much as it does speak about healing and helping widows and children. And I think what people would like to see happen is more of attention and speaking to these instances of domestic violence in homes and relationships, and not feel stuck because maybe society is looking at the churches and the faith organizations on some high level, and that they shouldn't be people and they shouldn't have issues and challenges, and so they suffer in silence. I'll say, and just not to be biased, but at an organization like Family Resource Center, in providing counseling, we try to address the needs of persons who would like to have faith and scripture involved in their counseling, because it's very important to them. And so we, at the agency, the counselors are trained, would seek out those scriptures that would help to support the areas of interest that they have, and to work with them, not against their teachings, but to help them search scripture for themselves and find the healthy translations in their perspective of what scripture says, and not to follow what they think they understand to mean that a spouse should remain in an abusive situation and not address it. And the agency would encourage and accept when orders are written for the abusers and the victim to participate in counseling, which is extremely important because they have an opportunity to understand the dynamics of what they're going through, to heal at the same time, or to approach healing at the same time. And if the violence is to a point where that victim expresses fear, that they're uncertain of their safety, the agency would encourage them to seek safety in the safe house. They wouldn't be encouraged to remain. They're certainly not encouraged to abandon the marriage relationship, but until it gets to a point where they can address the violence, there really is no marriage. There's just really a war zone, so to speak. And so we would try to address the needs as disclosed by the victim, while using the skill of the trained counselors to help them see what options they have to stay safe, to be able to continue to take care of their children, and at a point where they can address the marriage after dealing with the violence, then they would also have an opportunity to look at that.
Thank you very much. Sophie?
Well, it seems to me that there seems to be this sort of problem of stigma and changing, sort of pervasive opposition, in all corners of society. And I have a question here that really perhaps is not so much a question, but a comment that violence against women and children is an enormous problem in Liberia, South Africa, and the Virgin Islands. And in the Virgin Islands, in spite of clear laws, the victim is often made to feel responsible for shaming her family. How can we change the cultural climate? My experience is that it is often the maternal parent that does not want to press charges. But so, I suppose that this is an advocacy for change that has to get support from different corners. And so here are a couple of questions that relate to the engagement of men. How successful have you been in engaging men in assisting and fostering awareness in gender-based issues? And a specific one for Lema, how did the men respond to your movement? Did they attempt to control it? or in what ways did they attempt to block it?
I think war fatigue was really on our favor, and yes, we have a lot of bad men in Liberia, but we also have some real good and decent men. And I say this to say that when we started the protest, we made it very clear that we didn't want men involved. One, we had a very repressive regime, and usually when you have a thing of civil disobedience with women, people tend to see it as it's not going to work. These are jokers. Once men come in, then they start thinking maybe there are arms hidden amongst this group or there's something. So we purposely said to the men and to the young boys who came and said, we want to be a part, that you can't be a part. Let us do this. But more and more, every day as we sat, we got men to come and be of assistance. In 2003, funding was a difficult thing. And the wife of our ambassador here, Mrs. Bounds, and us sat down to talk about what we needed to do. And all of a sudden, this grand idea of a peace festival came up. And she was like the architect of that peace festival. But it was also amazing to see how the ambassador danced to the tune of his wife, and by extension, the tune of the women, in terms of helping to build the stage. And there were other men like my father and some of the women involved, husbands came, but they were the ones who really put a lot of hard work into some of the things that we could not do. In private, the Archbishop of the Catholic Church was there advising us by telephone on a daily basis on what he taught, because he was a big advocate and he was one of those who had really been speaking out against some of the issues in our country. So we honestly had some group of real good men. From my community where I live in a slum community, and the boys from that community came every morning to provide drinking water for the women as they sat in the sun. So they would come, and as we ran out of water, they brought water. And a few days ago, I had a conversation with someone, and this is just to conclude. We were talking about good and evil. And one of the things that came out clearly as we had this conversation was that in this world that we live in, there are more good people than evil people. The problem we have is that the good people fail to step up and step out. So most times, the few evil people that step out seem to be crushing and overpowering us. And so if more good men who appall domestic violence, who hate rape, and hate some of the crimes associated with against women, violence against women, were stepping out and not wanting to be seen as a nerd or as a woman or as something else, the bad ones will step back into they step back out of the limelight in the dark where they belong.
Any other comments on this role of women, role of men?
Yes,
well, I don't think that we are doing enough to help men. And I think we really need to provide a lot more services, counseling, therapy to, redirect that behavior. On St. Croix, we only have one organization that the court refers them to, and in St. Thomas, it's probably just one organization that the court refers the batterer to. But I think that we really need to do a lot more. But interestingly enough, I know on St. Croix, men are coming out and filing petitions for protection too. Because, just as women are being abused, there are some men that are being abused too.
Yeah.
So it was a, slightly interesting change that we've seen of late. Men are really filing petitions, lots of petitions.
In the question, one of the significant things I think in the question was what we can do in terms of the community and the climate, whether it comes to domestic violence or sexual assault. I do think that there needs to be definitely a support of the organizations that we do have on board, working towards ending these types of violent behavior in the community. And I think that we absolutely need to hear more from leadership and make leadership synonymous with the good people who are coming forward and pushing the bad people back. And I think if we can get leadership to turn speaking out against domestic and sexual violence into a new fad, into like a new thing to follow or to support. And again, I say leadership in support of speaking out against violence, not particularly supporting an organization or an idea, but speaking out against these prominent violent behaviors, just like we hear some talk about the other types of violence with gun violence, but to stop being afraid of the stigma and to support organizations that work to end domestic and sexual violence, and to participate in all of the different little programs and activities that speak out against violence. I think that the community would be encouraged to do so as well. And as I said, make leadership synonymous with the good people who step forward to speak out against violence, and hence pushing the bad people to the rear.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Alison.
I think that in terms of dealing with the violence at this level, I mean, we find that what we're trying to do is deal with it on a systemic basis. So we're trying to say that where the police are failing to act, we have to sue the cops. Where we have a client who was raped, her rapist was arrested, jailed, released, and he went out and he raped our client again for the second time. It's where he was on parole, but I mean it's those situations where you're seeing a failure to act where we can only tackle it, we feel, effectively at a systems level, and we make it simply too expensive to fail to act. It is just too costly to face order after order after order with significant damages going to our clients. You're in a position where it just becomes unsustainable, and you actually have to act. So that I think is really one of our responses, and I think we have been on occasion. Really, I think the faith-based sector in South Africa has become less and less organized over the last 10 or 15 years. It's gone from being extraordinarily organized during the anti-apartheid movement times to now to the point where it's very difficult to see what the role is that faith-based organizations are playing in combating this kind of the scourge. And I mean, it's certainly one of the things that we've been disappointed in, that we haven't seen more support. Not necessarily monetary support, but moral support, for both our clients and for this kind of work in South Africa.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting to the final parts of this, and I thought perhaps a question from the audience would wrap this up nicely, because it really covers everybody on this panel. It's a question about research, and basically it says, what is the state of research as to the cause of violence faced by women? Any takers, please? The questioner really wants to find out if in our countries we are engaged with trying to find the causes, as opposed to the good work we do in treating the effects or the consequences of violence. Anybody?
I believe
Thomas?
I believe your question is directed to the cause of the domestic violence.
Cause of violence, yes, the causes. Why do men beat women?
Well, where do I begin? It's, first of all, it seems as though it's a vicious cycle. For example, in most instances, at least in the domestic violence cases that I see so often, the women are usually the ones who file first of all. Less than 1% of men file domestic violence complaints, at least in the St. Thomas St. John district. As to the cause of the domestic violence, I think it has to do with, as we heard so much earlier, the issue of empowerment and whether or not women feel empowered. Women go into relationships for various reasons, and what I have found, at least in the family court, is that most of the time women come in feeling as though they're victims, they're less than, and so they allow that feeling to perpetuate, and the man, usually the partner they have chosen, is one who feels, unfortunately, that he in fact is in charge and that it's not a partnership. And so if the woman does not behave or do as she is told, invariably we see the man striking the woman. But most of the time, I started by saying it's a vicious cycle, because most of the time that's what they have seen. Just today, in discussing some of these issues with my law clerks, one law clerk talked of an incident where a 10-year-old told his mother that he was going to beat her the way he saw his father beat her. So it's just a vicious cycle.
Yes. Any other takers on the issue of the causes?
I think that, reasons, in terms of research, it's various issues, it's multidimensional, and I think that one can't actually just put down and just say this is probably what causes it. They range from socioeconomic circumstances, perhaps men, I don't know, I don't want to start providing excuses for men who are engaging in domestic violence, there's poverty, I don't know why, and in terms sometimes, I think in a lot of cases, in terms of it's a power relations thing. Let me tell you of a case in South Africa. Just it was in the papers a few weeks ago. One of our director generals in the Department of Intelligence, as you can see, the head of the Department of Intelligence. It appeared was beating up his wife, who is a deputy president of the ANC Women's League. The ANC is the ruling party. And it transpires that these two very powerful people, the woman who's a very powerful woman, who's an educated woman, who holds a very powerful position in society, has been being beaten up over the years, and it has never come through. And the man, when the DG, when he was asked about this, said that the woman felt that she was too powerful. She refused to iron his shirts for him and refused to cook, was giving the helper was being made to cook too much, and he wanted to show the wife who was the boss in the house. So, I mean, it's a reflection that even the most educated, even the most powerful people, this shows you that even that the issue of domestic violence touches on all sectors and all various different classes, all race groups in South Africa. I think that including the vulnerable. But I think that one of the major reasons in South Africa of the reasons for rape, particularly of child rape, is HIV/AIDS. Some men believe that if they sleep with a small child, they'll be cured of the disease. So hence the escalation of child rapes in the country. There's a belief that if you sleep with a child, you won't get the disease. And it's amazing how well spread this belief is.
My theory about abusers is simple. Insecure men who can never stand up to other men that use abuse as a tool of control.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think this has been an absolutely fascinating cross-country, cross-national discussion, and I myself, I'm completely struck by how similar, in fact, some of these challenges are, and I've learned an enormous amount about the different experiences in these three quite different countries, and from the perspectives of individuals who are playing very different roles in the legal structures, in the non-governmental processes, and using the diverse channels of action, from education to international advocacy to counseling and many other ways. So I think this has been a tremendously rich discussion, and I would particularly like to, obviously thank all of the presenters here, all the panelists, Lema, Teboho, Alison, Sandra, Patricia, Audrey. But I would also very much like to thank the audience who put up such interesting and really thought-provoking questions. And as you saw, I'm very sorry that we didn't have time to take up all of the questions that were raised. There were just too many. And that we had to, in a sense, move on to new questions before we could fully finish discussing each of the questions that were raised. So thank you very much.